Good afternoon. March 18, 2025. Welcome to Headlines News from Viet Canada Network. Canada News. Canada's annual inflation rate. Canada's annual inflation rate leaps to 2.6%. Canada's annual inflation rate jumped to 2.6% in February, after inching up to 1.9% in January, according to the latest data from Statistics Canada. On a monthly basis, the Consumer Price Index, CPI, rose 1.1% in February, while on a seasonally adjusted monthly basis, the CPI rose 0.7%. Although analysts had expected a rise in the February inflation figures due to the end of a temporary tax break on GST and HST on some goods, the rise in prices was steeper than projections. Statistics Canada's core measures of inflation, CPI trim and CPI median, which leave out tax impacts and which are closely watched by the Bank of Canada, BOC, also rose in February. Consensus ahead of today's announcement was for a 2.2% increase in the annual rate of inflation, according to analysts surveyed by Reuters. Slower price growth for gasoline versus January helped keep the headline inflation from rising higher, the report says. CPI trim and CPI median each jumped 2.9% from a year ago, a faster rise than the 2.7% seen in January. The CPI data come less than a week after the BOC cut its overnight rate a further 25 basis points. Economists noted a more hawkish tone from BOC Governor Tiff Macklem around inflation, with the U.S.-Canada trade war expected to put upward pressure on prices even as it weakens the Canadian economy. Technology news. Google to acquire cloud security startup Wiz. Google to acquire cloud security startup Wiz for $32 billion. Google on Tuesday signed a definitive agreement to acquire Wiz, the New York-based cloud security startup, for $32 billion in an all-cash deal. The deal, which will be Google's largest ever acquisition, will improve its cloud security offering in a world of advancing artificial intelligence and cybersecurity threats. Wiz will become a part of the company's cloud business. Google said it expects to close the deal in 2026. Wiz was founded in 2020 and has grown rapidly under Rappaport, with the company hitting $100 million in annual recurring revenue after just 18 months. The company's cloud security products include prevention, active detection, and response, a portfolio that's appealed to large firms and would have helped Google compete with Microsoft, which also sells security software. While the agreement may still draw government scrutiny, many on Wall Street have been hopeful that President Donald Trump's new White House administration will be more amenable to tech industry deals. Alphabet is currently battling an antitrust suit over its online search dominance. Middle East news. France condemns Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. France slams Israeli strikes on Gaza, lamenting numerous civilian casualties. France condemns Israeli airstrikes in Gaza, pointing at numerous civilian casualties. In a statement given at a foreign ministry press briefing, France calls for an immediate ceasefire and return to negotiations. France urges Israel to protect civilians and to stop blocking humanitarian aid, water, and electricity from reaching the Strip. It also calls for the unconditional release of all hostages held in Gaza. At least 404 people were killed and more than 562 injured in the new wave of Israeli strikes, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. More than 130 children and many women have been killed, including entire families, Gaza civil defense spokesman Mahmoud Basel told CNN. The deal between Israel and Hamas was already hanging in the balance, with Phase 1 ending more than 2 weeks ago and all sides at loggerheads over a path forward that might see remaining Israeli hostages freed and a permanent peace secured. Business news. Oil rises for third day. Oil rises for third day as Israeli strikes stoke Mideast tension. Oil climbed for a third day as escalating tensions in the Middle East overshadowed concerns about a potential global glut. Brent crude traded near $72 a barrel, up about 5% from its 3-year low earlier this month. Israel launched a series of military strikes across Gaza, shattering a ceasefire with Hamas while the U.S. ups the pressure on Iran. Options markets have been quick to price a pickup in geopolitical risk. Premiums on bearish put options declined relative to bullish calls on Monday, and the day's trading was dominated by a flurry of $100 a barrel wagers. U.S. President Donald Trump said he would view attacks by Yemen's Houthis on shipping as equivalent to direct affronts by Iran, on whom he has been tightening sanctions in recent weeks. Trump was also due to talk to his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on Tuesday to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine. Still, Crude remains on track for a quarterly loss due to a confluence of bearish factors. An escalating global trade war threatens demand, while OPEC and its allies are set to raise production from April. South America news. Peru declares emergency and deploys army. Peru declares an emergency and deploys the army as violence surges in the capital. Peru's president declared a state of emergency in the capital Monday and ordered the deployment of soldiers to help police address a surge of violence, amid widespread outcry a day after the killing of a popular singer. President Dina Boluard's government published a decree saying that the state of emergency will last 30 days, and authorities will restrict some rights, including the freedom of assembly and movement. That means the police and the army would be able to detain people without a judicial order. Peru has seen an increase of killings, violent extortion, and attacks on public places in recent months. Police reported 459 killings from January 1 to March 16, and 1,909 extortion reports in January alone. But outrage crested after the killing Sunday of Paul Flores, the 39-year-old lead singer of the cumbia band Armonia 10. Flores was shot to death early Sunday when assailants attacked the bus he and bandmates were traveling after a concert in Lima. Cumbia is a Latin music style that people dance to the rhythm of drums, maracas, and other instruments. The attack against the popular singer was not the only violent event over the weekend. On Saturday, an object exploded at a restaurant in the capital, injuring at least 11 people. Boluard's government previously decreed a state of emergency in an attempt to stem the violence between September and December. Vatican news. Photo of Pope Francis released. Photo of Pope Francis released as Vatican says his health continues to improve. The Vatican released the first photograph of Pope Francis since he entered the hospital a month ago to treat bronchitis, further indication that the pontiff's health continues to improve. The photo shows the pontiff in the chapel of his suite of rooms at Rome's Gemelli Hospital, where the Vatican press office said the 88-year-old pope can celebrate Mass. Earlier in the weekend, the Vatican said that doctors are decreasing his mechanical oxygen supply during the night. The bulletin said that while Francis continues to receive high-flow oxygen therapy through nasal tubes during the day, he is being weaned off the mechanical ventilation he has used at night for nearly 2 weeks. The report is the latest briefing from the Pope's medical team since their March 12 update that Francis' most recent chest X-rays confirmed that he is continuing to heal from double pneumonia. The Pope is in his 5th week at Rome's Gemelli Hospital, and the Vatican has refused to speculate about a timeline for his release. Francis continues both respiratory and physical therapy, and tonight's medical bulletin noted that these therapies, at present, are showing further, gradual improvements. At noon on Saturday, the Vatican announced that Francis, on March 11, approved a 3-year plan focused on implementing the reforms initiated by his recent synod on synodality. The announcement is being widely viewed in Rome as a strong signal that Francis intends to continue as pope, despite speculation of a potential resignation following his prolonged hospitalization. Canada news. Cross-border trips to the U.S. lows in February. Cross-border trips to the U.S. reach COVID lows with nearly 500,000 fewer travelers in February. Nearly 500,000 fewer travelers crossed the land border from Canada into the U.S. in February compared to the same month last year, according to data from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, the latest sign that President Donald Trump's taunts and tariffs have shaken bilateral relations. The number of travelers entering the U.S. in a passenger vehicle, the most common way to make the trip, dropped from 2,696,512 in February 2024 to 2,223,408 last month, reaching levels not seen since cross-border travel normalized in the post-COVID-19 era. The data shows there was a sudden reversal in February, just as Trump was launching his trade war and ramping up his annexationist rhetoric about Canada becoming the 51st state. The number of cross-border travelers headed for the U.S. in October, November, December, and January were all well above the numbers reported for the same month the year prior. But in February there was a clear break in the upward trend. The poor Canada-U.S. exchange rate, which is partly driven by Trump's trade policies, has made jaunts over the border less attractive for many Canadian tourists and bargain-hunting shoppers. Beyond passenger vehicles, there are other signs of a travel drop-off in the CBP data. The number of truck drivers making the cross-border trip fell from 493,000 in February 2024 to 473,000 this year. The number of passengers traveling by air to the U.S. held steady and increased slightly compared to the same month last year. 50,000 more people made the trip, but even air travel hit a multi-month low. Air travel is usually booked weeks or months in advance and is generally harder to cancel than a day trip by land. Some airlines have also since reported a slump in U.S. bookings. Thank you for listening.